So thank you for choosing this session, and we hope that it will be a stimulating session. My name is Steve Denning, and I currently are a columnist at Forbes and a member of the board of Scrum Alliance. I used to work in the World Bank. We have Dan Pontefract, who's the chief Envisioner for TELUS, a Canadian telecommunications company, and Bill Fischer, who is the professor of innovation management, not information management, innovation management. And Hayden Shaughnessy, I'm afraid, fell ill and is unable to join us. He has a very interesting book, The Elastic Enterprise, and maybe we can give some of the insights that he would have given. And this is about the creative economy, the economy of the future, which is already here today. It's an economy which is not just the view of the three people on the stage here, it's the view of a large number of books. I mean, here are 24 of the books, but there are a lot of other books describing this. So this is not something that I invented or Dan or Bill invented. This is something that's actually happening today. So some of the talks yesterday, well, we don't know how to imagine the future. Well, we're going to suggest that if you look closely with the right lens, you can see the future. The future is already here. Unevenly distributed, but already here. I agree with Adi Ignatius that the discussion yesterday had a kind of retro feel to it. We heard about the economy of yesterday, the economy that we've inherited from the 20th century. And we heard from Clayton Christensen that managers are using the wrong analytical tools. Gary Hamel told us that they are using bureaucracy, which is killing us. Roger Martin told us that our practices are destroying democratic capitalism. Martin Wolf told us that shareholder value is pretty much the dumbest idea in the world. We heard from Pankaj Kamalat that our business schools are not teaching us properly about management failures. And even John Hagel, when we got to questions of technology, told us about the dark side of technology. And Andrew Keen told us that the internet is not the answer, not the answer. Sort of like someone 10,000 years ago telling us the wheel is not the answer. Well, yes, it was not the answer to everything, but it certainly made a difference to our lives, and some for better and some for worse, but it certainly made a difference, and I think the internet is something on the same scale, which is tearing apart organizations the way they have been, and some slowly, some rapidly, and creating huge new possibilities. So we will be talking about what this is about. It's very long and it's very complex, but fortunately we've been working together and we've been able to summarize our presentation in 60 seconds. So here is our presentation in 60 seconds. In the world of 2014, there are only two kinds of organizations, those that delight their customers and those that don't. In firms that delight their customers, managers are enablers of self-organizing teams and continuous innovation. In the other firms, managers are controllers of individuals doing more of the same. In firms that delight their customers, employees are fully engaged in creating great customer outcomes. In the other firms, work is a dreary grind to produce merely average outputs. The firms that delight their customers are hugely profitable, while the other firms struggle just to stay in place. Firms that delight their customers are putting the other firms out of business. We know why this is happening, and we know the radical management principles that drive it. Welcome to the future. So that's our presentation. We'll now take questions. But we do actually have a few more things to say, but I thought it would be nice to set our conclusions to some Austrian music, music that was composed right here in the city of Vienna. And I think it has quite a lot of substance as well as some entertainment. And these books are talking about a different kind of economy. And I think the discussion yesterday talked about managers suffering from something called ADD, ambition deficit disorder. Ambition deficit disorder. We today are going to be talking about managers suffering from a different disease. It's called ambition surplus syndrome, ASS. So if we talk about managers with plenty of ass, it's not an insult, it's actually a compliment. These are managers who have dreamed about the future and are already implementing. This is not about things we have to imagine. We'll be taking you on a journey through firms that are actually doing this today. I mean, a suggestion yesterday, we cannot imagine what an organization would be like which mobilized all the talents of its employees. And not only that, collectively were more than the sum of the talents of the employees. What would a firm like that look like? What would a firm look like that was not only hugely profitable, but was fun to work in, that people loved coming to work each day? What would a firm like that look like? What would a firm look like that was implementing 30 innovations per day? Not per year, not per month, not per week, 30 innovations per day. What would that look like? We'll be taking you on a journey through those kinds of organizations. We don't have to imagine them. They are here today. We can go and see them and visit them and talk to them and talk to the employees, talk to the customers, and know what they're like. So we'll be learning about those kinds of organizations. And we have been working carefully on what exactly this is. And we spent actually a couple of months discussing amongst ourselves, seeing whether we could come up with a definition of the creative economy. And after several months, we boiled it down to this, and it's available on the website in Forbes and in Huffington Post. And it suggests that there are three main aspects to it: that there are goals and practices and metrics. The goal is a shift from maximizing shareholder value to continuously adding value to customers, a total focus on delivering value to the people for whom the work is being done. And collaborative practices, the shift from the hierarchical bureaucracy of the 20th century to leadership and management practices which are collaborative, which draw out the talents and capacities of the people doing the work, and metrics, appropriate metrics, which instead of focused on narrow financial goals, are focused on solutions for human prosperity. Those three things, goals and practices and metrics, are held together by a phrase that Simon Corkin told me, an invisible thread. They're held together by an invisible thread. Individually, they are powerful, but together, if you do those things all together, then you have something immensely powerful. They're held together by an invisible thread. And we're not going to go through the theory of this. If you want to read it, it's all in that website. What we're going to do is tell you stories of, give you examples of firms that are actually implementing this, not ones that are thinking of it, but are actually doing it, have actually done it. And so I'll be telling some stories, and Dan and Bill will be telling some stories, and then we're going to crowdsource this, and we're going to ask you to tell some stories. Do you know some organizations which have at least some of these characteristics? We're going to ask you to share with the audience your stories. But let me begin with an organization which you all know, Apple, an organization which it's easy to forget today that in 1997, Apple was practically bankrupt. It had been in existence for 25 years, and it was practically bankrupt, both financially and intellectually. And the reasons why it had come to this pass were several. It had been implementing 20th century management, hierarchical bureaucracy, which was demoralizing the staff and not producing innovation. In fact, they had devoted 80% of their profits not to investing in the future, but in shoveling this back to the shareholders and the executives. So there was not enough money, in fact, to produce innovation. And they also had a lack of focus. They had a large number of products, none of which particularly thrilled anyone, except a narrow group of Apple addicts. But it was basically a company that was a couple of months from bankruptcy. And then something happened. Steve Jobs came back. And he came back not just to save Apple, but he came out to test on a hypothesis. Is it possible to implement Peter Drucker's idea that a company should be totally focused on delivering value to customers? What would that look like? How could you have an organization that was totally focused on delivering value to customers? And so he came around and asked people, how does your job contribute value to customers? Tell me how it contributes value to customers. And 4,000 middle managers couldn't answer that question. They were basically shuffling papers going up and down the hierarchy. So he said, well, your job is gone. We only want jobs in Apple totally focused on delivering value for customer. He looked at the R&D department and pretty much the same thing. They were not delivering value to customers anytime soon. He said, the knowledge that you are trying to create, I can buy in the marketplace. I don't need that. And that was 1997 when he started. And for 4 years, it looked as though nothing was happening. He'd gotten rid of a lot of jobs. He'd reduced the number of products in the market that they were selling in the market. And he'd only produced one new computer in 4 years. So external analysts were wondering, Apple is finished. Apple is basically gone. But what he'd been doing in that 4 years was building the foundation for rapid, large-scale innovation. So in 2001, he introduced iPod and iTunes, so suddenly customers could have 1,000 tunes in their pocket at very low cost. Was everyone thrilled? Well, yes, they were. And so he totally revolutionized the music industry. In 2007, did the same thing with mobile phones. A company that had never been in mobile phones before introduced a phone that destroyed Nokia and most of the other mobile phone makers. And one of the things that enabled that to happen, that it wasn't just a mobile phone, it was a platform in which thousands, hundreds of thousands of developers all around the world could contribute apps, so that on that phone you could have an app to meet any conceivable human need. So hundreds of millions of customers had a device that could be totally adapted to their personal needs. So was the world thrilled with that? Well, yes, they were. And so totally revolutionized the mobile phone market. Did the same thing in 2010. And what was enabling this to happen was having abolished the large amounts of the hierarchical bureaucracy and working in networks of small teams, cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary small teams that were totally focused on delivering value to customers and trying to create insanely great profits. So the answer to the question, what would happen if you had a company totally focused on delivering value to customers, the answer was you would be making humongous amounts of money. You would become the richest company in the world. So this is not about causing suffering for shareholders. This is about causing massive, massive gains for shareholders. And also you have a very dedicated staff within Apple. Now, Apple is not without flaws. I mean, Steve Jobs was a tyrant. He treated some of the people around him very badly. But when Steve Jobs died, Apple was in mourning. They were not happy that a tyrant had gone. They were in mourning because he was a tyrant not for himself, but for customers. He was driven by producing these insanely great products for customers, and so was someone who was bringing out the talents and capacities of the staff at Apple. And if you want an example of an organization that totally focused on delivering value for customers, there it is. Another example, Salesforce. This is a company that provides customer relationship management based in California. It's now about a $4 billion company and has 13,000 employees, so it's quite a large company. It figures in an annual survey that Forbes conducts about who are the most innovative companies in the world. And the number one innovative company in the world for the past 4 years has been Salesforce. So how did Salesforce become the most innovative company in the world? Well, in 2006, it didn't look as though that was what was going to happen. 2006, they'd been in existence for 7 years, and they were growing rapidly, growing at 40% a year. And of course, as they grew, they had management consultants came in, and they were told, you need management. Mark Benioff, you need management. You need hierarchy, you need divisions, you need departments, you need layers, you need controls, because you have 30 million lines of code, and one single error could put that whole system out of operation for days, maybe. So you need to have controls in place to make sure everything is always running perfectly. And as those measures were implemented, Salesforce started slowing down. It started to become just another hierarchical bureaucracy. So Salesforce did something different. They implemented an approach that they didn't invent. It's an approach that's been implemented in many, many different companies, and it goes under various names of Agile and Scrum and Kanban and XP, strange computer names. But it's a set of rather simple practices, and the way these practices function is as follows. You start out by saying, by analogy to Apple, what are the most important things for our customers? Let's figure out the most important things that we could deliver to our customers. And when you've decided that, then you see which is the most important thing, which is the most important thing for our customers. And once you've decided that, you say, who are the very best people in the firm who could work on the most important thing? And when you've chosen those, you say, all right, you are now going to work on our most important thing. And of course, if you say that kind of thing in a bureaucracy, what happens is that the managers of those very best people all leap up and say, you can't have those people. They are already committed to my department's goals. You can't have them. You're going to have to find someone else. But in this methodology, you say, is this the most important thing or not? If it's the most important thing, we need the best people working on it. So those people are going to work on it. And you ask those people, the very best people, how much could you deliver in 1 month? Tell me, what do you think you could deliver in 1 month? And they go into a huddle, and they come back and say, we think we could deliver that. And then you say, right, go away for a month and deliver that. If there's anything you need, let us know. This is the most important thing. And if there's anything getting in your way, any impediment, let us know. This is the most important thing, okay? Then you turn to the next most important thing. Who are now the best people in the organization to work on that? And you work systematically down everything in the organization. Of course, what you find is that at the end of the day, there are a whole lot of unimportant things that you never get round to. But because they're unimportant, it doesn't matter. You have the best people in the organization totally focused on working on the most important things. And at the end of the month, you see what the teams have produced. And they're not producing a report. They're not producing a plan. They're producing something that would completed piece of work that would add value to customer, a component of something that would add value to customers. So you can touch it, you can feel it, you can test it, and if it isn't there, it's painfully visible. So this is a brutal way of accountability, because everybody can see whether you're delivering or not. So it's challenging. It's challenging for the people doing the work, because they've said this is what they can deliver, and then they've given every opportunity to deliver, and now they have to deliver, and any impediments, they can get removed. And it's challenging for the managers, because the managers have to decide what is the most important thing. They can't say now, well, we'll wait and see which way the corporate wind is blowing. No, they actually have to decide in real time, this is the most important thing. And so it's challenging for both, but it's also enormously inspiring for the workers, because suddenly they can get on with their job. Now they can actually do the job that they came to do, and nothing in their way, no impediments, It creates a hugely inspiring workplace. And so when you implement this, you grow very rapidly, you delight customers, and you grow, in the case of Salesforce, 40%, and you become the most innovative company in the world. So that's another example of an organization that's inspiring its workforce by working in this different way, very different way from the 20th century, and creating now in front of us these different kinds of workplaces. And they might say, well, that's Silicon Valley. That's not us. We don't work in Silicon Valley. But in fact, this way of working is now spreading into all sorts of different sectors. And you can see it, for instance, in Whole Foods, in retail, groceries. You can see it in Zara, European retail firm. You can see it in many different sectors now. It's a different way of working. It began most prominently in software, but it's something that is spreading to every part of the economy because it's a better way. It makes more money, it inspires the workers, and it creates values for customers. So what is there not to like about this way of doing it? And once you realize that there's a better way, over time it will take over. So you see this is not just between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world. This is about companies that have seen the future and are already implementing it. And it's not a question of old firms versus new firms. I mean, Apple is a 45-year-old firm, which is hardly new. And if you go into GE, a 100-year-old firm, although overall a lot of GE is still run on traditional lines, there are parts of GE, like GE Health, which is exactly like Salesforce, run in exactly the same way using these agile methodologies, and you wouldn't see the difference between Salesforce and GE. Now, in fact, when you go to GE Health, they say, we are a sleeper cell. We are a sleeper cell aimed at transforming GE so that GE will become an organization that's as agile and nimble as Apple and Salesforce. And it's because this is evolving. It's not as though those are a set of practices that are frozen in time. Other companies are now taking this a step further. So you take a company like Etsy, which was implementing what I was describing, Agile and Scrum, about 5 years ago, but they were finding there were problems. First of all, although this was much faster and delivering much more innovation than what they'd been doing before, it still wasn't fast enough. In their market, things were happening even faster than that, so they had to go faster. And the other thing that was bothering them was that the releases, which they were delivering every month, were causing problems because there would be a team that would develop the release, and then a team that would implement the release. And if there were problems in the way the release came out, then it was difficult to find out, well, exactly what the problem was and who was responsible. And so they were finding that a different way had to be found. And so they moved into something called continuous delivery. And what they did was to slice those changes, the things that would delight customers, which used to be put into a bundle that they would deliver each month. Now they were slicing them into even tinier pieces and assigning them to individuals. And an individual would be responsible for the total process, from conceiving this tiny change, getting it ready for implementation, actually implementing it, seeing whether it was working, and making sure that it did. So you were empowering workers to be totally in charge of their work. And as a result of that, you have now Etsy implementing 30 innovations per day, not per year, not per month, not per week, 30 innovations per day. So we're talking about something that's happening now. It's not something we have to imagine. It's something that's actually happening now. And you go to Etsy, you will talk to the employees. They are thrilled to be working in this different environment. I would imagine most people think if you talk about 30 innovations per day that the staff must be enormously frazzled and hassled. On the contrary, staff are calm and relaxed because they are now able to focus on getting things done in a way that's very productive and very creative. So this is a new world which is emerging. It's right in front of us. We don't have to imagine it. It's here today. And I'm going to turn to Dan and
All right.
tell another.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I am greatly delighted to be here. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia, which means I'm from the other coast of Roger Martin, but today I'm your token Canadian. So, why am I here? Well, first of all, show of hands, is anyone married to a dentist? This is good, because this is how your employees feel when they go to work every day. They feel as though that they're going to the dentist, and there's a big root canal that's about to occur. It's true. One day I was visiting a rather large high-tech company, let's say, and I was in the call center. And in that call center were about 400 or so call center agents. And what did I see? Well, I saw a wonderful lunchroom, I saw a kudo corner, I saw highlights of the week, I saw here's how we're impressing our customers, great bulletin boards, all kinds of fun and funky colors. And then I sat in with one of the call center agents, and her name was Andrea. And for about 15 minutes, I watched Andrea with a headpiece not dissimilar to the one I have on my head today, answering and taking questions with customers. But she also had her mobile phone in her hand. And while she was answering questions from these customers, she was texting. And I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. Why is she texting whilst on the phone with customers? So when the call ended, or the calls ended, and I caught on, I said, Andrea, what are you doing? She's like, oh, they don't allow us to use instant messaging, so we all use texting within the call center. That's root canal for an employee. That's going to the dentist. Gary Hamel yesterday talked about the 13% engaged stat that Gallup has put forward. Okay, that's tweetable, but what he didn't mention was the metadata that Gallup has surfaced that provides all the answers you need to ensure your organization is not like root canal, that in fact your employees are engaged, and these are some of the business metrics that will actually manifest. So I quote, between the top 25% and the bottom 25%, so engaged organizations being the top 25%, there is a 37% decrease in absenteeism, 28% decrease in theft, 48% decrease in safety incidents, 41% patient safety incident decrease, a 41% decrease in quality defects, and it gets better, 10% increase in customer satisfaction, 21% increase in productivity, and a 22% increase in profitability. So those that say, oh, only 13% of our organizations are engaged, I don't really care. What I care about is that your organizations don't feel like root canal, because when your people are engaged, good business results manifest. Now, Mr. Denning was kind enough to put my book, Flat Army, in one of what he calls the canons of radical management, Flat Army. Now, this is a how book. The subtitle is Creating a Connected and Engaged Organization. It's about what I call creating corporate commonality. How do you build up a culture that's open, transparent, and thus collaborative to achieve increased business results? Now, how do I know this actually works? Well, the token Canadian you see on stage, who's slightly follically challenged, works at an organization in Canada called TELUS. Now, TELUS is a telecommunications company. We have about 45,000 employees, 27,000 or so are based in Canada, and the rest in international locations. We're about a $12 billion company, so not small change. But in the summer of 2008, our employee engagement level sat at 53%. So essentially middle of the road. Essentially, half the people were pretty enthused of being there, and the other half were checked out. And in the competitive space of telecommunications, you all are aware that a widget is a widget, a phone is a phone. So we all essentially sell the same things, but what we could differentiate ourselves with is our culture and our customer service. And to get increased customer service, you need a better culture. So what did we do? Well, we instituted essentially 10 main points. And if I may, I'll go through these briefly. The TELUS leadership philosophy was this systemic, open model of how to connect and unite people. It was a way in which to hire, to promote, to develop, it became a common language for all 45,000 people. We instituted something called pervasive learning, where we believe that learning is not an event. In fact, learning is equal parts formal, informal, and social. And with that, we instituted something called Habitat Social, an umbrella brand of all the collaborative social tools you can think of, from microblogging to blogging to wikis to video sharing to virtual worlds. Next, we said, well, how are we giving back to society? It's very important for us to deliver in our community spirit. So we instituted something called We Give Where We Live, our community investment program. Next up was something called Bravo. Bravo was our internal recognition program, where people could give e-cards or, in fact, points for jobs well done, which then could translate into either goods to be purchased, travel trips to take, or donations to charity. We also instituted a whole whack of performance development changes. No longer was it just the MBO for the year, but quarterly check-ins with your manager, who was there more as a coach and a mentor, which symbolized our coaching and mentoring philosophy, that it's not a hierarchical relationship, it's a tandem and a team. And the last few things we did was we instituted executive teaching. For example, our CEO, Darren Entwistle, teaches 4 times a year from 9 in the morning to 9 at night to our employees. He also embarks on something called Frontline Forums, where he'll gather 100 to 200 different people in the unions, of which we have about 10,000 people in the union, and have a conversation, just him, about what's working and what's not. The last 2 pieces, work styles and customers first. Work styles, back in 2008, we had 20% of our organization that were what we'll call mobile workers. This year, we have 70% of the organization able to work from home 100% of the time, or like this at a conference, like I did last night from a hotel room. And customers first was the quintessential philosophical change that embodied everybody with this new culture. How are we going to serve customers better? And here are the results, just to put into perspective where purpose can be equal with profit. Well, our stock in the fall of 2008, was $28. Last May, it split at 71, and yesterday it closed at 42. Our shareholder return has outpaced the number 2 global telecommunications firm by 40 points on average, and we have been the number 1 telecommunications firm with shareholder return, mind you, over the last 5 years. The number of resumes we had back in 2008 were about 120,000 a year. Now we're approaching 300,000. People want to join this story they're hearing. That community spirit of we give where we live, we now donate $350 million to charity, and our people are donating 5.5 million hours of volunteer service to the communities in which they work. Our brand, it went from the worth of about $500 million to this past year being now branded at $4.3 billion. Our work styles program, I mentioned we went from 20% to now 70%. We have saved 4.6 million kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions, which equates to about 20,000 kilometers less traveled. Our return on learning, a measurement we put in place such that we could understand how learning equals change in performance, went from 60% to 76% over the past 6 years. And our customer complaints went down 50% over the past 5 years. But the interesting notion here is that in the telecom space in Canada, industry complaints went up 50%. Lastly, that stat I mentioned earlier, where we were starting this journey because our employee engagement score sat at 53%, it's now 83%, a 30-point jump in those 6 years. So Churchill said to improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often, but Drucker also said the best way to predict the future is to create it. At TELUS, through, in essence, flat army. This is what we decided to do, to take the bull by the horns, if you will, and say, you can put profit with purpose or purpose with profit. You can embody the spirit of an organization through an open culture if you want to achieve greater business results in the same breath. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Dan. And if I could ask the staff to put the slides back that I'd shown earlier, that would be helpful. Because I wanted to emphasize that we are talking about the same topic. We are talking about different organizations, but telling examples of people who are implementing, firms that are implementing the same idea. So Dan's book calls it the flat army. Bill's book calls it reinventing giants. My book calls it radical management. John Hagel calls it scalable learning. Some people call it the innovation economy. There are all these different names, but we are talking about this same subject, a different set of goals and practices and metrics and tying them together with this invisible thread. So, Bill?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here in this beautiful room. I'm thinking that one of the things that I need to do is tell you a bit about my life because it sets the stage for what comes next. I teach at a business school, IMD, Lausanne, Switzerland, and every week, more or less, we work with a team, yet another team of people from industry. Mostly I do in-company things, which means I work with teams from companies, or everyone comes from the same company, they work together. A typical engagement begins about 6 months ahead. I get a call from somebody in HR. They tell me, we have another group of great people coming. You're going to find they're wonderful. We've hired good people, you know, da-da-da-da-da. They arrive. You spend a week or two with them, you discover they are great. They have ambition, they're creative, they've got amazingly interesting lives outside of work. They're everything you hope for. They're also very, very nice to be with. And so over the course of a week or two, you get to believe HR was right, they've done it, this time we're really great people. Then we follow their progress after they leave. And you know, we look at business unit reports, we look at corporate results, we look at project results, and more often than not, the results are average. Okay? So what begins to happen, you think, is that these organizations are hiring great people and they're turning them into average performers, and they're doing it very, very fast. Okay? And I think that's oppressive, I think it's discouraging, and I think it's intolerable if we are talking about being curators of the human spirit. So more often than not, we're not curators of the human spirit, we're building prisons for the soul. And my sense is that there are organizations who today are in fact trying to do something different. I want to tell you about two of those organizations. They're very different. One comes from Europe, the other from Asia. They're both old economy industries. They're both large. One has 24,000 employees, the other has 80,000 employees, or at least did last year this time. And what they're struggling to do is to free up the potential in their people. The first organization is DSM. It's the old Dutch state mines. My friend Christian here told me today that it's an organization he admires. I admire them as well. I think that at least they're in life sciences and material sciences, and I think they're striving to really do the right thing. And what's happened in that organization is that they've tried to take the most creative part of the organization and liberate it and give the power back to the people in the organization to allow them to be great again. The other organization is a Chinese organization. It's Haier Corporation. It's located in Qingdao. It makes washing machines, refrigerators, television sets. You know, it's classical old economy industry selling commodity products. It's also struggling to free up its people, but in this case, it considers its creative class to be much broader set. Perhaps anybody in the organization. So with DSM, what was interesting was that they believe that the secrets to being successful in innovation are passion, ownership, and drive. Right? We've all heard this. And about 4 or 5 years ago, they embraced portfolio management as a way to become more strategic with the way they ran their innovation activities. And over time, actually very, very quickly, what they discovered was that by putting projects, innovation projects, into a broader, more strategic portfolio, they slowed things down and they moved power away from the people on the front lines back to someone in headquarters who was further away from the action and who was actually making the investment decisions. And that was if you were lucky, because if you had a small project or an unusual project, you might be lumped under what was called other. And when you're in the category other, time stops, right? You have no idea what's going on or who's making those choices. And these are for the most innovative, futuristic types of activities that they were doing in their organization. So it was a complete contradiction. I think they were trying to do the right thing, but by doing the right thing in several different places without being coherent in the story that they were telling, they wound up doing things that were at odds with each other. At Hire, Hire for 30 years has had two objectives in mind. One is, in deference to Dan, I'm going to call customer first, but it's trying to do the best thing you can do for the customer, no matter what that is. And the second thing is that our ultimate competitive asset is our people. These are people making refrigerators, right? These are people making washing machines. These are not scientists or MBAs. These are people working on assembly lines. But what Hire has believed for 30 years is if we could free up the knowledge that those people have, we could change our organization. So remember, this is an organization that Martin Wolf yesterday, or an industry that Martin Wolf yesterday characterized as, Clay characterized as being efficient, and then Martin said efficiency and creativity have no place in the same room. And that's Hire's business in almost every one of its activities. So this is a huge challenge for them. What both of these organizations did was to try to create platforms. And if you go back to what Steve was talking about with the Apple example, the genius of the iPad and the iPhone is the apps. It's inviting people in to help create individually tailored results without necessarily sacrificing the economies that Apple commands by being the largest producer of a commodity electronics product. And so what DSM has tried to do is to more or less break up the portfolio and create self-organizing platforms around different topic areas where people can run their own businesses. If we think about outsourcing or crowdsourcing as inviting the outside in a way, this is inviting the inside out because it's giving their scientists and engineers, R&D workers, the ability to take intellectual property from inside the organization and bring it outside in an effort to mobilize the best resources and the best ideas can possibly have. It changes everything. It makes them faster. It makes them more interested in what's going on in the customer. It moves power right onto the front lines. But it doesn't necessarily sacrifice the economies of scale behind them. With Hire, about 10 years ago, Hire moved from a classical organization into an organization of self-organizing work groups. So they took 80,000 people and put them into a competitive environment where everybody ran their own small business under competitive conditions. And what Hire is now trying to do is also move to a platform. So not so long ago, one of their great advantages is that they promised 24-hour delivery anywhere in China. China's a big country with a not entirely satisfactory physical infrastructure. So in order to be able to do 24-hour delivery is an enormous advantage. The question then became, what could we do if we freed this up? And the first thing was, think of what our competitors could do if they could use that as a platform for their own activities. So that's exactly what they did. They've taken this ultimate advantage and now have allowed it to spin off, de-hierarize it, so that in fact it can serve anybody, competitors included, in an effort to try to liberate the talent and the ideas that they have. And I can tell you, I've talked to truck drivers and warehouse people, and they love it. They love the idea of being de-hierized, of being able to run their own businesses, of being entrepreneurs. So in both cases, big organizations in mature industries are giving up control in order to free up human talent. And by doing so, they believe they're not necessarily sacrificing economies of scale, but they're gaining an ability to be faster, closer to the customer, and more entrepreneurial than they could ever do before. Yesterday, Gary Hamel mentioned that one of his clients had talked about having a slogan, leadership without bosses, and he said the reality is everybody could become a CEO. At Hire, the tagline is also leadership without bosses. And in fact, what you see is every day, by giving up control at the center, they truly are creating CEOs of small businesses across a big company. So I think one of the things that we can add to this collection of stories is it doesn't have to be new economy. It certainly doesn't have to be small to be able to do it. People are trying to do it right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Hello, buddy.
So we've been telling you stories about organizations that are already implementing the future. And what we're hoping is that some of you may know organizations in a similar mode. Do you know an organization that's similar to what has been done at Apple and Etsy and Salesforce and TELUS and Hire and DSM? Do you know an organization like that? We'll all also take questions, but very interested in hearing stories. Yes, we have.
It's Tim Castell.
Tim Castell.
Yeah. I'm Tim Castell from the UQ Business School in Australia, where sadly I have no software companies to study. So I work mostly with mining companies and other old industry companies. And I do a lot of work with the meat industry. And the first company that I worked with, we went and we said, well, have you thought about crowdsourcing with your people? And they said, well, the job is really terrible. Most people have English as a second language. We treat them really poorly, and they're armed with knives. So we don't really want to empower them too much. And that's kind of typical of the whole industry. We then went to another lamb processing company down in Victoria that's actually been implementing Lean. And they've done all of the stuff that we know works. They've been organizing into small teams of 8 to 12 people. They've been pushing data out so that everyone knows what's going on along the whole line all the time. The data is visible, and they can make decisions. And they've empowered the people to make decisions based on the data, much as Toyota has. And they've done all kinds of work to get everyone involved with making decisions and actually making the whole process work. And the outcomes have been, in an industry where annual turnover is about 75 to 80%, they're down to about 15%. And out of the people that have left the company over the last 3 years, more than half have eventually come back. They've also taken their margin in an industry where the average is about 2.5%, and their margin has increased by 1%, which is massive. So I think that the issue here is that it's not just tech, it's not just software, it works everywhere, much as it does in Hire. And so I think we have to find these weak signals that are taking place right now and figure out how to amplify them.
Right, exactly. Yes, let's hear. And while we're doing that, if you could put the slides back, that would be helpful, as we'll need those in a second. Thank you.
So I have a couple of stories, very quickly, one-liners. I've been deeply involved with some transformations into agile management with a couple of companies. One of them, which Steve already mentioned, Salesforce.com. So I've been one of the trainers in Scrum management. It's spreading out throughout the company. Started, as Steve accurately described, with the software operation. But some of the managers then got promoted, so they got the the Pepsi generation kind of thing. That was the only style of management they knew, and they got promoted into other areas. So it started spreading out, and that's, you can't say that all the success was based on agile management, but there's something very special there. If you talk to Salesforce employees, they will tell you how proud they, a lot of pride, a lot of fun at work, a lot of recognition for their capabilities. Another company that I work with is Cars.com in downtown Chicago. They decided to, well, this is a very competitive environment, right? So companies that are either more ambitious, that want more revenue, that want more profit, tend to look into these areas, or they're in a bind, right? They're in a very competitive environment, and they need to differentiate themselves, as Dan was saying, by doing something different, and so they become more innovative. So I have a couple of other stories like that. As of last month, I resigned as the CEO of one of the largest compliance management companies worldwide in the privacy area, just to do more of this agile management stuff. But again, for 12 years, we managed our company with Scrum, with agile management. Anyhow.
Thank you. Great. Yep. Yep.
A few examples that come to mind for me are Morningstar, which is a tomato packaging plant. It's a completely flat organization, peer set salaries, complete financial transparency for all employees. Zappos, which has the famous Happiness Inc., Tony Hsieh's book. Spotify, which uses this approach as well. So those are a few other examples in various industries, reselling, packaging, another software company. One question I had is, it's funny you mentioned Agile, because in Agile there was this invisible thread that was being woven by all these different approaches. You mentioned Scrum and XP, and early on those felt like competitors. Like, so we do Scrum, no, XP's better. And there wasn't a single set of terminology to describe what those things were. And eventually the creators of all those different processes came together and said, let's discuss what we have in common instead of competing with each other. I wonder if there's something similar that needs to happen now at this management level, where we see these threads being woven through, but people call them different things. And I think that it could be much more powerful if we could describe it using the same terminology and say, hey, this is actually an emerging pattern that's working in the creative economy. So I don't know if you guys had any ideas about how to make that happen.
Well, the first thing I'll say is thank you. And the second is the creative economy is really the manifestation inside your organization of what your behaviors are. So if your behaviors are akin to war, i.e. one side against another, then you've got to come to some sort of way, like in the Christmas truce story, this 100-year anniversary, December 24th, you've got the troop from Warwickshire and from Stratford coming out of the trenches because they heard the Germans singing Christmas carols, and by the next day they're playing football in no man's land. So how can the creative economy as a metaphor be created inside your organization with that type of collaborative spirit and behavior? That's what you've got to get all business units from the function trying to create.
Yes, over here.
Peter?
Thanks. So you asked for a story?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm Peter Van, and I'm working for an organization called SWIFT. So we operate the network of the banks worldwide, 210 countries. And when you come in our building, there is a big slogan saying, failure is not an option. So our previous CEO asked us to build an innovation team that is trying to create an innovation culture in an organization that has a DNA of failure is not an option. So the first iteration of what we now call InnoTribe. So we have created an own brand for our innovation efforts, InnoTribe, which is a tribe of innovators in the financial industry. And the tagline is creating collaborative innovation for the industry. So the first iteration was a fast development shop, like 3 products, get them out in 1 year, where usually it took us 5 years to get a product into the market. So we shipped 3 products in 1 year in that first iteration. Then we pivoted into an enabling organization with a lot of basically based on the open innovation model, with a lot of activities on the front end of innovation, going from internal innovation challenges, external innovation challenges, international startup competitions, bringing up thought leaders to inspire us from inside out and outside in, getting into prototyping, getting into incubation projects. And last, we pivoted again, where we now are almost like an iteration hub, with the 3 areas of strategy, one on the level of disruptions, getting in disruptive voices. The next layer is about platform thinking across the company, how do we do that? And the last layer is about new product development. And across those layers, we are focusing on a couple of things like brands, like bringing in startups and get them closer to the financial industry. It's getting a continuous learning organization, it's creating circles of expertise, and it's also creating a network of external experts so that we are iterating all the time with external voices of disruption. Thank you.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Steve, good morning. This question directly to you.
Yeah.
I'm from the United Kingdom and professor of management studies. I should not ask more questions. Instead, I ask lots. Management practice a shift from hierarchical bureaucracy to collaborative leadership practice. I have been trying to British executive who are running the British economy in different top ranging banking sector and corporation sector. But you know, the British bureaucracy, hierarchical bureaucracy, it is very difficult to break. It is their homeland. And what is your answer? They are not collaborative. They don't want to give up their premises from 1 inch to other. I am asking you how either we need to rewrite the management practice for globally or for London Business School or all business of the world, then it will work. Thank you. I'm not asking any more questions.
Thank you. And I think it would be useful to turn to what is this transition about, and why isn't it happening? What are the constraints that are in place, and what can we do about them? And we had one suggestion here. I think it's quite striking that a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about here on the platform and the examples from the audience are talking about practices that are not new. Mary Parker Follett was talking about this in the 1920s, Elton Mayo in the 1930s, Douglas McGregor in the 1960s, Waters and Peterman in the 1980s. 90 years we've been talking about these practices. Why are we still talking about them? And I'm going to ask Dan and Bill to give their take on it and what we can do about it, and then get suggestions from the audience. What could we do to move this along? And my thought is why it's so difficult to make this happen is that we have this 20th century set of management practices which link together. They're held together by an invisible thread. You have the goal of making money for the shareholders and the executives, and that ties together beautifully with hierarchical bureaucracy, because no one, as people said yesterday, no one comes to work in order to make money for the CEO. It's not, no one has a spring in their step if that's the purpose of the organization. So the only way to drive that goal is to have control, to have command and control. And so you have managers telling people what to do. You have systems and rules and reports to make it happen. You have a focus on efficiency and controls and predictability. And you have communication, which is basically top-down. This is what you have to do. You have to do whatever it takes to take 5 cents, reduce the costs for the share price for the coming quarter. Those things, they have the invisible thread that Simon was talking about that ties that package together. And so just changing 1 or 2 aspects of this picture won't stick. You can make it stick for a little bit, but the other practices are entrenched in place, and they will hold the thing together. So you see examples where organizations implemented teams, and it was brilliant, and then suddenly you come back a few years later, and it's all gone. What we are talking about here in this platform is a set of practices which are tied together with this invisible thread, and they are self-reinforcing, interlocking. You have a goal of delighting customers. You have managers that are enablers, not controllers. You have agile, iterative practices to control work. You have values of openness, transparency, continuous improvement, and you have not top-down communications, but interactions, conversations, multi-directional conversations, upwards, downwards, sideways, and these practices tie together as an integrated whole. They're not just a grab bag of different things. And so the challenge I see is how do we make this leap from one system, a whole systemic set of processes, to another. And some of the ways to do that is, first of all, to get clear and to get agreement that this is what we are talking about, and to get beyond the different labels and to start to see that we are, in fact, talking about the same thing. And as Peter suggested in the agile software development, coming together and actually agreeing among many different factions within software development, they were all working under one banner with one goal, with one set of values. That was enormously clarifying and moved that forward. That is one way of doing it. Another way is to actually increase the amount of learning that organizations are having. So you'll see one of the proposals, the papers on the desk, is a learning consortium where organizations could actually participate in site visits and see some of these firms, see what's going on at these places where you have 30 innovations per day. What does that look like? How do people talk? What's it like to be in that kind of environment? So my sense is if we can get a consensus on what it is, we reinforce that with site visits, that would be one way of making this shift happen a bit faster, and that we won't be here in 90 years' time still talking about the same changes. But Dan and Bill, what do you think of what could really move things along?
Well, first of all, Stephen, I think greed is seductive and power is contagious. And the reason why we stay where we're at is because of that 1-2 punch. Now, I'll tell a short story to explain my point. Let's say hypothetically that a facilities manager had made a decision as a building was being condensed and some floors were being outsourced or outlet, I suppose, sublet, that he sent out an email that said, we're moving floors to the 100-odd people, and we're throwing away the plants. And this was a very hierarchical, dictatorial, power-tripping type of email. And the people, the employees, said, well, wait a second, that's not our culture. That's not our healthy lifestyle. That's not our wellness. We'd like to save the plants. So it's very easy for someone to send an email out because of that power and, to a degree, greed of the authority, and say, no, we're going to kill the plants, as opposed to saying, what should we do with the plants? How might you help us with this situation of collapsing a floor? It's just so easy to be in that hierarchical position.
I have a couple of thoughts. I was struck by the comment this gentleman made in the front row here about pride and fun. We didn't hear that yesterday at all. Nobody talked about pride. Nobody talked about fun. Nobody talked about labor. Nobody talked about organized labor. Nobody talked about works councils. None of that was in the conversation at all. It's almost stunning that in its absence. So I think that the organizations we look at believe in people, and I think that it goes beyond trust. It's a real belief that people matter and really are the key advantage that an organization has. And then these organizations create a structure, if you will, that's the wrong word, to support those people. I think that the organizations that I admire who do this well make change normal, not episodic. So this is done before you need a burning platform. This is done when resources are abundant and people feel good, not when resources are scarce and people are afraid, because this requires people to take changes. I think they do it coherently. So it's not just structure, and it's not just measures, and it's not just, it's all of those things put together at the same time in a mutually reinforcing fashion, so that nobody's being asked to take a leap into the unknown, that there's a structure there. I think it requires, you use the Steve Jobs example, I think it requires self-assured, courageous, strong, top-down leaders. Ironically, you can't liberate people unless the people at the top are comfortable with themselves. Otherwise, they're afraid and threatened. And I think it requires, my last point is a willingness to give up control. And what we found in one of the books we did, Virtuoso Teams, was that innovation occurs most prolifically when people believe they have absolute freedom to contribute their ideas, and top management believes it's in complete control at the same time. So when you use Steve Jobs and you talked about 1,000 songs in your pocket, that's a measure that everybody understands. I can leave this room knowing that you know what the objective is. There's no ambiguity. Or when this gentleman over here said failure is not an option, you know, what Gene Kranz said just before that was he drew a map of the moon, map of the Earth, showed that the astronauts were not going to arrive successfully. He said, gentlemen, that's unacceptable. I want this line all the way down to Earth with time to spare. We've never lost an American in space, so sure as hell, I've watched the movie before. Failure is not an option. But in both cases, the objectives were explicit, they were precise, they were inspiring. Everybody heard it at the same time. It's this transparency. And you know, it's the makings of bringing people in as equals rather than treating them as subordinates or assets or the like.
Right. Any suggestions? How can we move this along? Yep.
Pamela Matson with Excellent. I don't want to underestimate the importance of mindsets that go along with the behaviors. And I think that we can identify people as courageous or inspiring, but I think that there's people in general want to be successful. So there's often a reason, or in the work of Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, an immunity to change. So I want to just consider the shared humanity of reactivity and talk about the mindsets as well and address that.
This is huge. I mean, it's a different way of thinking, speaking, and acting, and that it comes from this different mindset. Absolutely. Yeah. Someone else? Yeah.
Thank you all. My name is Ronald Dammel from the Netherlands. Maybe an interesting way how we can actually go where we want to go is, I just tweeted about the DSM example. It's a Dutch company. And I work a lot in government and semi-public organizations, and they are extremely hard to change, extremely hard. I got one retweet from one of my clients, a tax authority in the Netherlands, about DSM, especially about portfolio management, which is killing them as well. It's absolutely a killer. And DSM responded to that, saying, well, Stephen, that's his name from the tax authority, come join us, talk to us, collaborate. How do we do? What can you learn? What can we learn? I mean, that's the power of social networks, and just get the message out there. Maybe might be a good start. This is a prime example. It is happening as we speak, and they are now making an agreement to talk to each other. I'm in a data-centric industry, and data supersedes business units. It supersedes processes or systems, and especially in government. And I'm pretty keen on how you see that. These companies are really stuck. Absolutely stuck in getting ahead, in getting innovation, in getting innovated. Any help, I think, for government agencies is absolutely necessary in drawing up a road or a path to actually get to Scrum and actually get to an agile mindset, where to go. Do you have any opinions on that? And it's important to me because I think, and I think to the society as well, because government is serving the common cause, not selling nice bags to older ladies more and more. No, this is the real thing. And I think we need to implement change in government and semi-public organization as fast as we possibly can. But I'm worried.
You want to take a crack at this?
Well, first of all, from our vantage point in Canada, at least at TELUS in Canada, we're getting an increasingly number of inquiries into our story and requests for help. So there's this, I suppose, wonderful chapter that's developing, and it's, oh, if a telecommunications firm can do that, perhaps we can do that, because telecommunications used to be part of the government before we deregulated. So there's this aspect that's happening, at least in Canada. And then to sort of answer your question, quite frankly, a widget is a widget, like I said earlier, but culture is culture. And so whether it's government, not-for-profit, or for-profit, how you put and instill behavior before tool and form before function is what is the end game. And so the creative economy is the creative government, is the creative not-for-profit. It's those behaviors and forms that government needs to understand, has to manifest first before they're ever going to have any end state change.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I would add that yesterday there was a tweet from DSM saying, take care of your people and your people will take care of your business. I don't think it's exactly quite that simple, but I think that in a way we've been talking about that, right? And it never ends, so that they're never going to get it right, but they're never going to give up trying. That's my sense, and that's better than we can expect in most organizations.
We've almost come to the end of our time, so I'm going to close with two thoughts. One, the thought that we've been really hammering throughout the session from this saying from the science fiction writer William Gibson, the future is already here, it's just very unevenly distributed. But if you look carefully, if you look with the right lens, you can see the future right in front of us. And I think for the private sector is going to take the lead in this. They've already shown how to implement it. We're not lacking in knowledge. We have all those 24 books plus many more on how to do it. It's more a question of getting on with that. And to enable us to do that, the result of every journey is to know the place that we left when we began. We're going to get some re-inspiration from Ludwig van Beethoven. And
in the world of 2014, there are only two kinds of organizations, those that delight their customers and those that don't. In firms that delight their customers, managers are enablers of self-organizing teams and continuous innovation. In the other firms, managers are controllers of individuals doing more of the same. In firms that delight their customers, employees are fully engaged in creating great customer outcomes. In the other firms, work is a dreary grind to produce merely average outputs. The firms that delight their customers are hugely profitable, while the other firms struggle just to stay in place. Firms that delight their customers are putting the other firms out of business. We know why this is happening, and we know the radical management principles that drive it. Welcome to the future.
so that's our show. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks.